He heard two alien girls beg, "Can we have your leftovers?" Then truly fed their empty stomachs. The auroras of Thessera, 9 shifted faintly over the domes, their pale green light spilling across the orchard rows. Inside the protective glass, the fruit vines gave off their own glow, thin veins of bioluminescence bred into them decades ago, when Federation science still touched this world. Now, with the Federation collapsed and the colonies left to fend for themselves, the land stood quiet. That quiet was what Willie Davern had sought. Willie was 36. Once, he had worn the uniform of a Federation scout, trained to move unseen, to observe and report. Years of discipline had left their mark. The way he sat straight, even while eating, the way his eyes flicked automatically to the orchard edges, the way his boots were lined neatly by the door. But the Federation was gone, and its campaigns had left him tired of missions written by other men. He returned to his family's land to live by simpler rules: harvest, repair, trade, sleep. He told himself this was enough. That evening he ate at the stone table outside. Steam lifted from a bowl of stew thick with beans and soft orchard fruit. His mind moved through routine checklists: the east pump filter, the next morning's trade weights, the slow rot creeping up where the grape rose. Then a sound interrupted the order. Gravel shifted in the dark. Willie froze, not with panic, but with alertness drilled deep years ago. He turned his head just enough to catch the shape. 2 figures stood where the orchard shadows thinned. Children, small, thin, dressed in clothing not suited for the damp chill. He didn't move his hands toward a weapon, just rested them flat on his thighs, making his posture open but watchful. The taller girl, maybe 8 years old, stepped forward first. Her skin reflected the dome light in a pearly sheen tinged with lavender. Red hair streaked with metallic silver fell across her shoulders, tangled and unkempt. Beads hung loose from her wrap, clothing that had once been ceremonial but was now a tattered veil of what her life used to be. She stood upright despite trembling. She forced herself to meet his eyes, though fear was written in the tightness around her mouth. "Can we have your leftovers?" she asked. Her voice carried both shame and urgency. The smaller child, no older than 5, clung to her side. This one's skin ran a deeper violet, her hair the same streaked red, but shorter and uneven, as if cut in haste. Her wrap had fallen half open at the shoulder, the fabric frayed and dragging. Her eyes were wide, too wide, the kind that had seen hunger longer than they should have. Willie's first reaction wasn't pity, it was calculation. 2 children, alone, desperate enough to approach a stranger's home. No parents nearby, no footsteps behind them. He scanned the orchard edges again. Nothing. His training pressed questions into him. Were they bait for a larger trap? Was someone waiting in the dark? But the tremor in the younger girl's legs, the gaunt hollows in their cheeks, the stiffness in their thin arms, those were not tricks. That was starvation. He set his spoon down. He didn't speak right away. He let silence work, gauging how they would react. The older one tensed, ready to pull her sister back. The younger one stared at the stew as if looking at it too long might make it vanish. Willie pushed the bowl away and stood, moving slowly so they could track every motion. He pulled 2 clean tin bowls from the rack by the wall. "Sit," he said, his tone steady, stripped of any softness or edge. Commanding, but not threatening. The older girl hesitated, her hand tightening on her sister's wrist. Willie poured the stew evenly, set both bowls on the table, and deliberately took a spoonful from each before sliding them forward. Safe. Eat." The younger girl couldn't wait. She grabbed the spoon, nearly dropping it, and shoveled too much at once. She gagged, eyes wide with panic, like she expected punishment. Willie leaned forward, pressed his hand to her back, and guided her breathing until it eased. "Slow. There's more," he said. Something in his calm tone broke through her panic. She tried again, slower this time, tears welling as her stomach accepted real food. The older girl kept watching him as much as she ate, studying his hands, his eyes, the way he scanned the yard. She recognized discipline. She recognized the difference between a man waiting for an excuse and a man holding a line steady. Between bites, Willie spoke. "Your names?" "Leary," the older said finally. She glanced down. "She's Kaylin." "Willie," he said, "you're safe here. Tonight." Leary's spoon stopped. "Just tonight." He met her stare without flinching. One night at a time. They ate until their bellies swelled. Kaylin leaned sideways against his arm, too tired to hold herself upright. Willie didn't move her away. He let her rest, though every part of him measured the risk. Children meant commitment. Commitment meant exposure. And exposure had killed men he knew. But when Leary's voice broke through the quiet, low, flat, carrying the weight of exhaustion too heavy for her age, he understood the decision was already made. "We don't have anyone left." Willie felt the words like a strike to the chest. He thought of patrols that had abandoned settlements, of orders that had reduced lives to numbers, of the faces that disappeared in his reports. He had come here to leave that behind. Yet here it was again, in the form of 2 starving children. He didn't argue, didn't promise anything he wasn't ready to give. He simply adjusted Kaylin's weight against him, looked directly at Leary, and said, "Then you're not leaving hungry again." Leary's jaw clenched, her eyes glassy but defiant. She didn't thank him. She didn't trust him. Not yet. But she let her sister sleep against his chest. That was more than words. As rain thickened against the domes, Willie rose. "Inside, there's heat." He pointed to the door, then looked back at Leary. "You decide." She hesitated, scanning the orchard, the path, the man. Her instincts screamed to run, but her sister was already asleep, her hand tangled in his shirt. Leary swallowed, lifted her chin, and gave a single nod. Willie held the door open and stepped aside. He had chosen, and though he told himself it was only for one night, he already knew better. The rain drummed harder on the domes as Willie led them inside. He left the door unlatched, just as he'd promised, and hung his jacket across the threshold as a clear signal. He would guard, not cage. The warm air from the hearth pushed back the damp chill clinging to their thin wraps. The girls hesitated just past the doorway, bare feet curling against the wood floor, unsure if stepping further would break an invisible rule. Willie didn't press. He walked ahead into the kitchen, set 3 mugs on the table, and poured warm milk with a trace of cinnamon. He carried the mugs over, placed them where the girls could reach, then returned to his own chair without comment. Kaylin's nose twitched at the scent, her small fingers curling around the handle. She looked up as if to ask permission. Willie caught her eyes and gave a small nod. "It's yours." She drank, both hands clutching the cup, and let out a breath that carried months of hunger and cold. Leary stayed rigid, her fingers still gripping her sister's wrap. She watched him carefully, eyes tracing his every move. Willie noticed her shoulders tighten whenever he came too close. He shifted, deliberately keeping distance, showing he had no need to crowd them. He could feel the question forming behind her silence, so he answered it before she spoke. "The door stays open if you want. No locks in this house. You can leave anytime." That eased some of the tension in her shoulders. She lowered herself slowly into a chair, setting her sister in the one beside her. Kaylin yawned, a sharp, tired sound that made her eyes water. Willie leaned back. "You've been on the streets a while." He wasn't asking. It was clear from their clothes, their posture, their thin wrists. Leary gave a short nod. Her voice was low, steady. "Since the last raids at the port, our grandmother didn't wake. Then mother and father went to find work. They didn't come back." She said it without drama, as if stating simple facts. But her jaw clenched and her throat tightened on the last word. Willie studied her face. He'd seen that same tone before, years back, when soldiers reported losses like they were reading numbers off a slate. A child should not carry it. He didn't try to comfort her with empty words. "How long since you've eaten a full meal?" he asked. 2 days, Leary said. She hesitated, then corrected herself. "Maybe 3. I tried to make her eat, but she kept giving it back to me." She glanced at Kaylin. Kaylin, half asleep, whispered, "You were hungrier." Willie looked at both girls. His instincts screamed at him to ask who else knew they were here, whether someone might come looking, whether danger would follow. But he saw their bones pressing through their clothes, saw their exhaustion, and made the calculation. The greater risk was sending them back out. He stood, motioned toward the washroom down the hall. There's hot water, towels. You can clean up. I'll stay out here. Curtain's yours. They didn't move at first. Kaylin leaned close to her sister. Is it safe? She whispered. Leary's eyes flicked toward Willie. He held her gaze steady, calm. It's safe. You'll hear me if anyone comes near. I'll be right here. After a long pause, Leary nodded and led Kaylin down the hall. Willie stayed leaning against the kitchen wall, arms folded, eyes on the front door. He listened as the water hissed. Then as muffled laughter broke out. Light, hesitant, the kind that slipped through before they remembered they weren't supposed to laugh anymore. It struck him harder than he expected. When they returned, Kaylin wore one of his long shirts that hung past her knees, damp hair plastered across her forehead. She looked years younger clean. Leary had wrapped herself in another shirt cinched with a cord. The raw lines around her collarbones were visible now, without the beads cutting into her skin. She kept her chin high, but her eyes flickered to the fire like she couldn't help herself. Willie rolled out 2 sleeping mats by the hearth, dropped blankets beside them, and lit more kindling. He didn't say they should sleep there. He just left the option clear. Take whichever you want. Kaylin crawled onto one, curled under the blanket, and was asleep before another word could be said. Leary lay down on the other but stayed on her side, eyes still open, scanning the room. After a long silence, she spoke quietly, not looking at him. Why are you doing this? Willie didn't sit right away. He checked the fire, checked the windows, then lowered himself to the floor near the door. Because I don't throw children back into the street. Her eyes narrowed, trying to judge if that was the whole answer. And tomorrow? One day at a time, he said. His voice carried the same weight as a soldier's order. Not up for debate. Leary didn't reply. She lay still for a long while, then reached out with her hand until her fingertips brushed against the edge of his boot. She didn't look at him, but she didn't pull away either. Willie stayed awake, listening to the rain on the glass, the hum of the pumps, and the soft breathing of 2 children who had nowhere else to go. He thought of the mission he had given himself when he left the Federation, to live quietly, to answer to no one. Tonight, that mission shifted without warning. He had taken in 2 children. He had tied his life to theirs. And whether he admitted it or not, he already knew. He would not let them leave hungry again. The night ended quietly, the house settling into a rhythm of rain on the glass and steady breaths by the fire. Willie hadn't slept more than a few hours, his back pressed against the front door, eyes half open out of habit. Every sound from the orchard still triggered his attention. The groan of a branch under water weight, the hiss of a pump line, the distant rattle of a passing cart on the trade road. Yet none of it disturbed the children. Kaylin shifted once in her sleep, murmured a soft word he couldn't catch, and then buried herself deeper under the blanket. Leary stayed half awake longer, her hands still near the edge of his boot, but eventually her breathing evened out. When dawn came, pale light seeped through the curtains and washed the room in muted gold. Willie rose, stiff but alert, and moved to the kitchen. He set water to boil, cracked 2 eggs from the orchard hens, sliced a piece of sunfruit, and dropped grain into a pot. The smell filled the air quickly. He worked without sound until he heard Kaylin stir. She sat up, rubbing her eyes, hair wild and sticking in every direction. She blinked at the table and then at him, uncertain if she was allowed to approach. Hungry, he asked. She nodded but didn't move. Leary woke next, pushing herself up fast, instantly scanning the room, making sure her sister was still close and the door still unlatched. When her eyes landed on the steaming bowls, her shoulders tensed. Do we have to work for it? She asked. The question caught him. He set down the ladle and faced her directly. No, not here. He spoke firm, like he wanted the words to hold weight. You eat because you need it. No trade. Kaylin slid off her mat and came closer, cautious at first. Willie placed a bowl in front of her and stepped back, letting her decide the distance. She dug in quickly, but this time slower than the frantic rush of the night before, like her body had begun to trust food would not be taken away. Leary lingered, then finally sat across from him. She picked up her spoon but kept her eyes on his face, waiting. You'll need clothes, Willie said. Those wraps won't last. Trade port has stalls. I'll take you today. That made Leary flinch. The port isn't safe. Her words carried more than fear. They carried memory. Willie leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. What happened there? She looked at her sister, then back at him. Her jaw tightened. When the raids came, everyone ran. Some people were taken. Others left behind. No one stopped them. We hid. Kaylin's voice was a whisper, almost drowned by the clatter of her spoon. We stayed in alleys. Sometimes we begged. Sometimes we stole. The silence that followed was heavy. Willie didn't push for more. He already had what mattered. No one was looking for them. No one would come to his door demanding them back. Still, the thought pressed at him. Children left alone in a trade hub meant someone, somewhere, had noticed. And yet they had survived long enough to reach him. That survival spoke of caution, not luck. When breakfast was done, he set a pair of small rubber clogs on the floor. They looked mismatched against their thin ankles, but they were better than bare feet on wet ground. Wear these, he said. You'll need them in the orchard. Kaylin slipped hers on eagerly. Leary hesitated, fingers brushing the edge of the shoe like she expected a trick. When nothing happened, she finally pushed her foot inside. Willie stood and held the door open. We checked pumps first, then vines. Outside, the orchard glistened under the rain. Domes magnified the light, droplets sliding down the glass like streaks of silver. Willie showed them the main pump house, guiding them to the control panel. Green means fine. Yellow, I handle it. Red, you find me fast. He pointed at the gauges, letting them see, not just telling. Kaylin repeated the colors out loud, committing them to memory. Leary studied the pipes, the hum, the vibration in the floor. Her eyes narrowed, like she was learning the system on instinct. They walked the rows after, Willie breaking open a ripe sunfruit. Juice spilled down Kaylin's wrist. She froze, waiting for correction. Willie handed her a cloth. Food belongs in you, not on you. That's the only rule. She smiled, brief, startled, and wiped her arm. Leary bit into her piece more cautiously, but didn't look away from him this time. By noon, he made good on his word and took them into the trade port. The neon signs buzzed in the damp air, reflecting on puddles. People glanced at him, leading two alien children, then looked away. The silence of their indifference was sharper than open words. Willie ignored it. The girls walked close, Kaylin clutching his hand, Leary hovering just behind his shoulder like a shadow. At a clothing stall, a woman named Sorry Eye with dark braids and violet skin set aside her ledger. She looked at the children, then at Willie, and didn't ask questions. Instead, she laid out soft leggings, tunics, and coats. Try these, she said, her voice quiet, respectful. She didn't press, didn't linger. She let Leary make the choice. Back at the homestead, Kaylin carried her wrapped bundle as if it were treasure. She stopped on the path and asked in a small, frightened voice, "Do we have to go now?" Willie crouched low, meeting her eye. "We're going home." The words seemed to hang in the damp air longer than any promise. Kaylin squeezed his hand tighter. Leary didn't answer, but she walked a step closer than before. That evening, as the fire warmed the room, the girls tried on their new clothes. Kaylin twirled in a tunic far too long, laughing until she caught herself and clamped her mouth shut, unsure if laughter was safe. Willie didn't comment, just adjusted the hem and said, "We'll fix it tomorrow." Leary sat on the floor, sewing a loose button with thread Sorry Eye had included, her hands steady. She looked up at him once, as if testing whether she truly belonged in that space. Willie gave her a single nod. She bent her head back down and finished the stitch. For the first time, the house didn't feel empty. The fire burned low, throwing a steady glow across the room. Willie sat at the table repairing a hinge from the south gate, his tools lined neatly beside him. Kaylin lay curled under a blanket on the couch, half asleep but fighting it, her fingers clutching the hem of her new tunic like she was afraid it might vanish overnight. Leary sat cross-legged on the rug, silent, sewing another loose button onto her coat. Her movements were careful, exact, the kind of discipline picked up for necessity, not patience. She watched him as she worked, her gaze flicking up whenever his hammer struck. When the door creaked against the wind, Kaylin startled awake, eyes wide. She looked straight at him, panic clear, waiting to be told what she had done wrong. Willie set the hinge down, crossed the room, and tapped the door twice with his knuckles. "Just the wind," he said. "You're safe." He didn't add anything else. He knew too many words made promises sound thin. Kaylin sat up, voice small. "If we eat too much, will you throw us away?" The question hit him harder than he expected. He crouched to her level, his expression steady. "No," he said. "Not today. Not tomorrow. Not ever." He said it flat, as if it were a rule, not comfort. Her lower lip trembled, and anger flashed across her face at her own tears. She climbed into his lap without asking, hiding her face against his chest. Willie held still, letting her set the terms. He placed a hand on her back, firm enough to anchor, not enough to trap. She sighed against him, the fight draining out. Leary's voice came quietly from the rug. "And if we break something?" She didn't look at him, but the question was loaded. "Then we fix it," Willie said. His tone was simple, not indulgent. He wanted her to hear that mistakes didn't mean exile. The room went quiet. Kaylin finally drifted off, her breaths shallow against him. Willie shifted her onto the couch, tucked the blanket around her, then stood. He noticed Leary watching every move. She wasn't looking at his hands this time. She was studying his face, testing for cracks, for hidden judgment. "What about when you get tired of us?" she asked suddenly. He turned to her, expression unchanged. "I don't take in people to throw them out. That's not who I am." Her jaw tightened. "How do we know that?" "You don't," he admitted. "Not yet. You'll learn." Leary set the coat aside, fingers twisting in the thread. Her face hardened, but her voice dropped. Others said the same before. They lied. Willie let the silence stretch, then spoke evenly. "I'm not them. I'm not asking you to trust me tonight. I'm asking you to eat, sleep, and wake up here again tomorrow. That's all." She didn't answer, but her eyes softened for the first time. Later, rain still hammered against the domes when Sari-Ai arrived. She carried a pot of soup wrapped in cloth and a bag of thread. She greeted Willie with a short nod, then crouched beside Leary. Without asking questions, she showed her how to reinforce seams and stitch pockets into the coat. Leary followed every motion, her hands quick, her focus absolute. Kaylin stirred awake and stared at the woman, then at Willie, uncertain. Willie gave her a slight nod. Safe. Kaylin eased back into the blanket. When Sari-Ai left, Willie walked her to the porch. Their hands brushed as he held the door, neither of them commenting. He lingered a moment, scanning the wet orchard rows before shutting it again. Inside, Leary was still sitting with the coat in her lap, the seams now reinforced. She looked at him as if to confirm whether she had done it right. "It'll hold," he said. "Good work." Her shoulders straightened at the words. She folded the coat carefully, placed it by the hearth, then lay down on her mat. This time, when she reached out in the dark, her hand didn't just brush the edge of his boot. She left it resting there, steady, as the fire crackled low. Willie leaned back against the door again, his eyes on the dim room. He knew the questions weren't done. They would test him with more, about safety, about permanence, about whether he would tire of them when the work grew heavy. He had no speeches prepared, no promises to offer. What he had was consistency. That, he told himself, would have to be enough. And for the first time since they arrived, the house didn't feel like it belonged to him alone. It felt watched, measured, even challenged, but no longer empty. The following morning, the sky was clear, the glass domes washed clean by the storm. Light cut across the orchards in pale beams, the air sharp with the smell of wet soil and citrus leaves. Willie had already been outside at dawn, inspecting the lines, repairing a loose pump clamp. When he came back inside, the girls were sitting at the table, Kaylin with her hair a tangled mess, Leary with her coat folded neatly in front of her. He set out bowls of porridge, placing them one by one. Kaylin dug in without hesitation, but Leary sat stiff, her hands resting in her lap. She stared at the bowl as though it were a trick. "What happens if we waste food?" she asked. "You clean your bowl," Willie said. "You don't waste food. If you can't finish, we save it." Her chin lifted, testing him. "And if we don't?" Willie's eyes met hers, steady. "Then you'll be hungry later. That's consequence enough." No one gets punished for being full. Kaylin blinked between them, spoon hovering. She chewed quickly, eager not to be caught in the exchange. Leary's mouth twisted like she wanted to argue, but she picked up the spoon and started eating. After breakfast, Willie led them to the greenhouse where trays of seedlings sprouted in neat rows. The girls walked slowly, their hands brushing the leaves. Kaylin's eyes lit up at the tiny buds glowing faintly under the lamps. "Do we get to help?" she asked. "Yes," Willie said. He crouched, showing her how to pinch dead leaves, how to water without flooding the soil. Kaylin followed carefully, her small fingers clumsy but determined. She giggled when a droplet splashed on her nose, then froze, embarrassed at the sound. Willie only smiled faintly and moved on, letting her know it was allowed. Leary stayed back, arms crossed. "What if we break one? Then we plan another," Willie said without looking up. Her jaw tightened, but her eyes flicked toward him, searching for any sign of sarcasm. Finding none, she moved closer and copied his motions. That afternoon, he left them briefly inside while he hauled a crate from the storage shed. When he returned, the front door stood wide open. Kaylin sat on the porch steps, her legs dangling, eyes fixed on the orchard. Leary stood in the yard, holding her sister's hand, but staring at the road beyond the hedge. Willie stopped, measuring the scene. Neither girl looked back at him. He could feel the tension in Leary's body, even from where he stood. It wasn't an escape. It was a test. "You planning to leave?" he asked, voice even. Kaylin flinched, shaking her head quickly. Leary's shoulders stiffened. "We wanted to see if you'd stop us." Willie set the crate down, wiped his hands on his trousers, and walked closer. He didn't raise his voice. "The door isn't locked. It never will be. If you want to leave, you can. But if you go, you'll be back where you were yesterday, hungry, cold, waiting for someone who doesn't come." He stopped a few feet away. "If you stay, you eat, sleep, and work. That's the rule." Leary finally looked at him, defiance in her eyes, but fear just behind it. "And if you get tired of us?" He crossed his arms. "Then I'll say it straight. I won't pretend. But I didn't bring you here to send you away." The silence stretched. Kaylin clutched her sister's hand tighter. Leary's throat worked, her jaw clenched, and then she guided her sister back and sighed without another word. That night, Kaylin curled against the fire again, exhausted from work in the greenhouse. Leary sat at the table, silent, watching him mend another hinge. After a long time, she spoke. "I thought you'd yell," she said. "Why?" he asked. "That's what people do when you test them." Willie put the hinge down, met her gaze. "Yelling doesn't make people stay. Consistency does." She studied him, then gave a small nod. She didn't thank him. She didn't need to. The fact that she stayed in her chair instead of retreating to the mat was enough. For Willie, it was confirmation of something he had already decided. They weren't leaving. Not now, not tomorrow. The test had come, and he had passed, not by force, but by standing steady. The days began to fall into a rhythm. Willie rose at dawn, his boots crunching gravel as he checked the orchard rows and the greenhouse pumps. The girls followed, sometimes sleepy, sometimes already whispering to each other about the tasks ahead. Their routines grew steady. Kaylin took to watering and counting seedlings, while Leary learned to keep records on the trade slips, copying his blocky handwriting into careful lines. The homestead itself shifted. The couch no longer sat empty. Kaylin piled blankets there, turning it into a nest during the day. The kitchen shelves held jars of dried fruit, some labeled in Leary's careful hand. Willie had once eaten at the stone table outside in silence, but now the table always carried 3 bowls, sometimes for when Sci-Fi stopped by. One afternoon, he brought them into town for supplies. The trade port buzzed with vendors calling out prices, the smell of grilled meat mixing with engine oil from the repair docks. Willie walked with his hands loose at his sides, scanning faces. He felt the stares before he heard the whispers. The human with the alien girls. It wasn't said loud, but it carried. Some voices curious, others sharp. Kaylin pressed herself against his leg, clutching the hem of his coat. Leary walked half a step behind him, her chin up but her shoulders tense. Willie didn't break stride, didn't look left or right. He guided them towards Sci-Fi's stall, where fabric hung in neat rolls and tools sat stacked in trays. Sari greeted them with a nod. Her dark braids were tied back, her violet skin catching the neon lights overhead. She didn't ask about the whispers. Instead, she handed Kalen a strip of fabric with small beads stitched along the edge. "For you," she said. Kalen's eyes widened, and she looked instantly at Willie for approval. He gave her a short nod. She clutched the cloth to her chest, grinning despite herself. Leary lingered by the tools, touching a spool of thread. Sari crouched beside her, voice low. "You can learn to make your own clothes. Strong seams last longer." Leary studied her face, then the thread, then finally nodded once. The walk home was quiet. When they reached the orchard path, Kalen tugged at his sleeve. "Do we have to leave because people don't like us?" she asked. Her voice cracked. Willie crouched down, steadying her small hands with his. "No one's sending you away. Not because of whispers, not because of anything." She nodded, but tears welled anyway. Leary's eyes were hard, protective. "They'll keep talking," she said. "Let them," Willie replied. His tone was flat, final. "What matters is this house." Inside, they ate stew around the table. Kalen leaned against him, half asleep between spoonfuls. Leary sat across, watching his face closely, as if trying to see if he meant every word. She didn't ask again, but she didn't need to. Later that night, while the girls slept, Willie stood at the window, arms crossed. The orchard lay quiet under the aurora glow. He thought about the whispers, about the stairs. His life had been built on staying unnoticed, keeping routines simple. Now he had 2 children in his care, and that meant visibility. The old scout in him measured risks, how far neighbors would go, whether indifference might turn into interference. Yet when Kalen murmured in her sleep and shifted closer to his boots by the door, and when Leary's hand reached just enough to brush the edge of his jacket, the calculation ended the same way every time. He wasn't giving them up. Not to hunger, not to fear, not to whispers. The house was no longer a retreat from the world. It was a line he had chosen to hold. And with each passing day, the line grew stronger. The harvest fair brought noise and light that the girls hadn't seen in months. Lanterns swung from posts along the Tradeport's main street, strings of colored bulbs buzzing faintly overhead. Music bled from a crackling speaker near the stage where children sang off-key but loud. Vendors shouted prices over the hum of the crowd. Willie walked steady through it, Kalen's small hand gripping his sleeve so tightly that her knuckles turned pale. Leary kept close to his other side, her chin high but her eyes darting at every loud voice. People glanced at them as they passed. Some looked away quickly, others muttered low. He caught the words human and orphans more than once. He didn't react. His stride didn't change. His presence, calm and unyielding, was answer enough. At their stall, Sari had already set out baskets of fruit, stacked neat and appealing under the lantern light. She greeted the girls first, offering Kalen a small piece of candied peel. Kalen hesitated until Willie gave a nod. She took it, smiling shyly. Leary stood straighter beside the baskets, scanning the labels, checking the prices. When customers approached, Willie let her handle the trade slips. She spoke careful, quiet but firm. He noticed the way her voice grew steadier each time. The fair went late. Children ran between the stalls with painted lanterns, their laughter spilling into the streets. Kalen pulled at his hand, dragging him toward a row of hanging lights shaped like stars. "Can we stay? Just a little," she asked, eyes wide. He crouched, studying her face. She wasn't panicked, not hungry, just wanting. He gave a single nod. "Stay close." They walked together under the lanterns, Kalen pointing at every shape, her voice bright. Leary followed more quietly, but he saw her mouth twitch into the beginnings of smile. For the first time, their movements weren't shaped by survival. They were shaped by choice. Later, behind the stall, after the crowd thinned, Sari found him wiping down a crate as if it had wronged him. "You're doing that stare again," she said, folding her arms. "Which one?" "The one that looks like you're still on patrol." He smirked faintly. Scout habits die slow. She stepped closer, lowering her voice so the girls couldn't hear. You gonna tell her to take the apprenticeship? Leary had been offered a chance at the co-op school, a program that would take her across the ridge for 3 nights a week. Willie had watched her fold the paper, tucking it away, as if too heavy to carry. I'll tell her I'm proud either way, he said. Sorry Eyes studied him for a long second, then said quietly, you don't have to carry this alone anymore. The words landed harder than she probably intended. He didn't answer right away. His eyes tracked the glow of the lanterns, the slow drift of smoke from a food stall. Finally, he nodded once. I know. That night, back at the homestead, the girls sat at the table with a folded apprenticeship slip between them. Leary stared at it for a long time. Her voice shook slightly when she finally spoke. I want to try it, but I'll come back. Willie met her gaze, his expression steady. Do it. Leary's eyes glistened. She rose, walked around the table, and hugged him hard. He didn't make a speech. He only held her shoulder, saying quietly, proud. Kaylin, not to be left out, clambered onto his lap, clutching his shirt. She whispered into his chest, Dad. The word froze him for half a breath. Then Leary echoed it softly, testing it out, Dad. He swallowed hard, nodded once. Okay. His voice was low but firm, not wavering. Later, when the girls were asleep, Sorry Eye lingered by the kitchen, her braid loose over her shoulder. Willie leaned against the counter, arms crossed. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then she stepped close, reached for his hand. He didn't pull away. The kiss came simple, direct, steady. Not rushed, not tentative. When it broke, he let out a short laugh under his breath, surprised at himself. I've been thinking about that for months, he admitted. I know, she said with a small smile. You're not subtle. He shook his head, resting his forehead against hers. I tried. For the first time in years, he felt something shift inside him. Not duty, not obligation, but choice. And as he glanced toward the couch where the girls slept, blankets pulled to their chins, he knew the choice was already made. Morning came with a quiet unlike any before. Leary stood by the door with a small kit bag slung over her shoulder, the apprenticeship slip tucked neatly inside. Her hair was tied back, the silver streaks catching the first light through the orchard glass. She tried to look older, to stand taller, but her hands shook where she gripped the strap. Kaylin clung to her waist, eyes red from holding back tears. Do you have to go? She whispered. Leary bent down, pressing her forehead against her sister's. I'll be back before you finish your first seedlings. She tried to smile, but her voice cracked. Willie stood by the table, his arms crossed, watching every detail. His instinct was to protect, to keep her close, but he knew this wasn't a fight. This was a step. He walked forward, held out a small multi-tool, the one he'd carried since his scout days. Yours now, he said simply. Leary stared at it, then clipped it to her belt, pride flickering through her tears. She hugged him tighter than she ever had before. Her voice broke into his collar. Thank you for not throwing us away. He closed his eyes, resting his hand against the back of her head. That was never going to happen. She nodded against him, then stepped back, wiping her face with both hands. When the door closed behind her, the house felt bigger, emptier. Kaylin sat at the table, shoulders slumped. Willie crouched down beside her. She's coming back, he said. And until then, we've got work. Kaylin sniffed, nodding. I'll help. The weeks that followed proved it. She watered the seedlings, learned to sort trade slips, even tried cooking with Sorry Eye's help. The house carried her small laughter again, sometimes breaking in at unexpected moments. Willie noticed she no longer asked if she would be sent away after meals. The fear was fading, replaced with belonging. Sorry Eye moved between her stall and the homestead more often, her visits natural, not announced. She taught Kaylin to thread beads into cloth, showed her how to mend a seam without wasting fabric. At night, when Kaylin drifted to sleep by the fire, Sorry Eye lingered in the kitchen with Willie. They spoke little, but the space between them shortened with each passing evening. One night, with the seedling racks glowing faintly in the greenhouse, Willie set a document on the table. His voice was calm, but it carried weight. I want this official. The adoption papers were simple. Names, signatures, the mark of intent. Leary returned that weekend, tired but alive with new ideas from her classes. She read the papers, then signed without hesitation. Kaylin clutched the pen too tightly, scrawling her name with shaky lines, then grinned when Willie ruffled her hair after. Sorry-Eye watched quietly, her eyes soft, as if she already knew this was coming. When the last signature dried, Kaylin climbed into Willie's lap, laughing through tears. "We're stuck with you now." "Exactly," he said, pressing his chin against her hair. That evening, they carried the new sign Kaylin had painted out to the orchard gate. The letters were bold, the message simple. No one gets turned away hungry. Together they mounted it, stepping back to look at their work. For the first time, the homestead didn't just belong to Willie, it belonged to all of them. As night fell, they ate outside at the stone table. Leary spoke quickly about greenhouse designs, her hands moving as she explained airflow and root density. Kaylin showed her the beadwork she had done with Sorry-Eye. Willie sat with his arm resting around Sorry-Eye's waist, not moving it, not hiding it. She leaned into him, her smile faint but steady. When the dishes were cleared and the fire inside burned low, Sorry-Eye pulled him aside in the kitchen. Her hand slid into his, firm, certain. She kissed him, not cautious this time, but sure. Willie let it happen, then deepened it with the steadiness of a man who had stopped running from his own life. Later, he checked the doors, as he always did. The orchard was quiet, the night sky clear. He paused in the hallway, looking at the two girls curled in their blankets, and at Sorry-Eye sitting by the fire waiting for him. "Home," he said under his breath. The word no longer felt borrowed. It was real. The mission he had once set for himself, silence, solitude, survival, was gone. In its place stood something heavier, but better. A family. A choice he would never undo. Several weeks had passed since the papers were signed, and the change in the house was unmistakable. What had once been Willie's solitary refuge was now alive with sound and motion. The orchards rang with Kaylin's laughter when she chased after insects between the rows, and the kitchen carried Leary's quiet voice reading out notes from her apprenticeship, her words halting at times, but steadier with every evening. Even the silence had shifted. It was no longer empty. It was full, comfortable, the silence of people safe enough not to fill every space with words. That morning, Willie rose early, as always. He shaved at the basin, pulled on a clean shirt, and tied his boots with practiced precision. But today felt different. Today he would walk into the registry office with his head high, not as a scout hiding in plain sight, not as a man avoiding attention, but as someone presenting his family. His. No hesitation in the word anymore. When he stepped into the kitchen, Kaylin was already awake, perched on the stool with her legs swinging. She wore her new tunic, beads threaded along the collar from Sorry-Eye's last visit. Her hair stuck out unevenly, but her grin was bright. "Do we go today?" she asked, voice rising with excitement. "We do," Willie said. He set a bowl of porridge in front of her, watched her dive in with a spoon too big for her hand. Leary joined a few minutes later, carrying her notebook, hair tied back in a tight braid. She looked more serious, almost cautious, but her eyes betrayed a quiet pride. "Will we tell them if they ask questions?" she asked. "The truth," Willie said. He poured himself coffee and sat across from her. "You live here. You eat here. You work here. You're my daughters." Nothing more complicated than that. The walk to the registry was long but steady. The Tradeport streets were busier than usual, carts clattering, voices shouting prices. Willie felt the eyes on them again, the same whispers he had ignored before. But today, he didn't ignore them out of habit. He dismissed them with certainty. Kaylin skipped at his side, her hand wrapped around his, unconcerned. Leary walked upright, her chin lifted, the papers tucked under her arm. Inside, the registry hall smelled of dust and old ink. Wooden desks lined the room, each with a clerk bent over slates and paper. When Willie approached, the nearest clerk, a thin man with tired eyes, looked up. His gaze flicked to the girls, then back to Willie. "What business?" "Adoption registry," Willie said, voice firm. He slid the papers across the desk. The clerk skimmed them, his quill scratching as he filled in notes. "Names?" "Willie Davern," he said. Leary and Kalen Davrin. He didn't stumble over the last name. The clerk raised an eyebrow, but didn't argue. Confirmation signatures, he muttered, pushing the slate toward them. Leary stepped forward first, her hand steady as she wrote. Kalen clutched the pen awkwardly, tongue poking from the corner of her mouth as she scratched out her name. Willie added his signature last, each stroke deliberate. When the clerk stamped the form, the sound echoed through the room, louder than it should have. He handed the copy back without ceremony. Done. They're yours. Kalen's face lit up. She tugged at Willie's sleeve. We're really Davrin now. You always were, he said, voice low but certain. On the walk home, Leary carried the stamped paper pressed against her chest like it might vanish if she loosened her grip. Kalen skipped beside them, announcing to anyone who looked their way, We're Davrin. She shouted it twice, louder the second time, until Willie lifted her into his arms just to quiet her down. She laughed against his shoulder, not caring about the stairs. Back at the homestead, Sorry-Eye was waiting on the porch, a basket of fresh bread in her arms. She read the look on Willie's face before he spoke. It's official, he said simply. Her smile was small but warm, her eyes lingering on him before shifting to the girls. She knelt, hugging them both tightly, bread forgotten on the step. Kalen squirmed free and held up the stamped paper. See, we're real now. You've been real all along, Sorry-Eye said, brushing Kalen's hair back. That night, they celebrated the only way they knew how, with food and fire. Willie roasted fruit until it caramelized. Sorry-Eye laid out fresh bread and butter, and the girls insisted on eating outside at the stone table under the glow of the auroras. Leary unfolded the paper once more, laying it flat on the table where the firelight caught the seal. She looked at Willie across the flickering glow. So now, no one can take us away? No one, he said. He meant it. Kalen curled up against his side, murmuring, Dad, as if the word itself was still new, still something to test, but already her favorite sound. Later, when the girls finally drifted off in their blankets, Willie stood at the porch with Sorry-Eye at his side. The orchard stretched silent under the green sky, the sign at the gate catching the faint glow. No one gets turned away hungry. Willie breathed deeply, his arm brushing against Sorry-Eye's. He let himself feel the weight of the day, the finality, the relief, the pride. His mission was no longer to survive quietly on land that felt empty. His mission was here, to raise them, to protect them, to build a home that could not be broken by whispers or loneliness. For the first time since he left the Federation, his life was not a retreat. It was forward, anchored by 2 small signatures on a registry slate, and by the voices that would now call him Dad without hesitation.